"Open wide and close your eyes," said the girl, promising to make a millionaire who had been mute his whole life speak. Then something incredible happens. Comment giving a rating from 0 to 10 for my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The scream sliced through the stuffy afternoon air like a blade, echoing through the cobblestone streets of the historic town at exactly 3 o'clock. The 52-year-old millionaire nearly dropped his coffee cup as he stepped away from the window of his luxurious apartment. It was always at the same time, always with the same desperate intensity. For 3 weeks straight, that sound had been coming from the 2-story clapboard house across the street, a faded yellow building with peeling blue shutters that contrasted sharply with the elegance of the modern building where he lived. "Must be a kid throwing a tantrum," he muttered to himself, straightening his tie before returning to work. As the owner of the largest construction company in the region, he was used to solving complex problems, but he preferred to keep his distance from other people's dramas, especially after living alone for 5 years. Ever since he lost his wife on a rainy night, he preferred not to remember. Across the street, inside the clapboard house, the 4-year-old girl huddled in the corner of the kitchen, her small arms unable to comprehend why her aunt hated her so much. The 38-year-old woman firmly held a metal spoon she had heated on the gas stove, her eyes bloodshot from the alcohol, fixed on the child trembling before her. "You're a curse on this house," the aunt hissed, her voice slurred from the cheap whiskey she'd been drinking since noon at the local dive bar. "Because of you, my sister's gone. Because of you, I lost everything." The spoon came down hard on the girl's small arm, leaving a red mark that joined the other scars dotting her thin arms. The child bit her lip to keep from screaming louder. She had learned that screams only enraged her aunt, who used to work at City Hall, until she was fired for constant absences caused by her addiction. The girl closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's soft voice, singing that lullaby before bed. It was all that was left of her now. Fragments of memories and a melody that insisted on echoing in her mind during the most painful moments. "Stop whimpering," the aunt grunted, putting the spoon back in the drawer as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Go to your room, and I don't want to see you until tomorrow. And if you smear those walls with that filthy charcoal again, you'll see what real punishment is." The girl ran to the small room at the back of the house, a stuffy space with an old bed and a crucifix on the wall. There, she curled up under the thin sheet and began to hum her mother's lullaby quietly, the only thing that still comforted her. She didn't know that, across the street, someone had finally paid attention to that melody. The millionaire stopped reviewing the contracts when he heard the faint but distinct sound. He knew that song. His late wife used to sing it while she cooked, a folk song about free birds. But where was it coming from? He approached the window again, his eyes scanning the facade of the clapboard house. One of the back windows was ajar, and from there came that childlike voice, trembling but persistent. For the first time in 3 weeks, he felt something other than simple annoyance. There was something in that voice that touched a sensitive chord in his chest. Something that reminded him of responsibilities long buried under layers of work and isolation. Next door to the clapboard house, the 61-year-old retired schoolteacher was watering her begonias when she heard the girls singing. Unlike the millionaire, she could no longer ignore the signs. During her 40 years teaching elementary school, she had developed a sixth sense for children in distress. And that voice carried a pain that made her heart ache. "That's odd," she thought, observing the windows of the house next door, a family she had known for decades. The aunt had always been troubled, but ever since she took custody of her orphaned niece, something had changed in the atmosphere of that house. The girl never played in the yard, never ran through the streets like the other kids in the historic town. The teacher dried her hands on her apron and made a decision. The next morning, she would pay a courtesy call to her neighbor. It had been a long time since she had properly talked to the woman, and maybe it was time to get to know the little girl better. Meanwhile, The millionaire remained at the window, an uncomfortable feeling growing in his chest. The song had stopped, but something in those few minutes had awakened memories he preferred to keep dormant. Memories of a former employee who had abruptly resigned 5 years ago, a few months before the accident involving his wife. The employee was a kind woman, always humming while organizing the construction company's files. Then, suddenly, she had simply disappeared from his life, leaving only a formal resignation letter and many unanswered questions. He had never thought about her again until he heard that familiar song echoing from a house where a child seemed to be suffering in silence. The sun began to set over the mountains surrounding the town when the girl finally fell asleep, exhausted by pain and fear. Her little fingers clutched the sheet, and in her dreams she flew like the bird she secretly drew on the kitchen walls with pieces of charcoal found in the yard. Across the street, the millionaire closed the curtains and tried to return to work, but he couldn't concentrate. Something had changed that afternoon, something he didn't yet fully understand. For the first time in years, he felt that maybe it was time to pay attention to what happened beyond his own windows. Night fell on the historic town, but the echo of that children's song continued to resonate in the mind of a man who had spent 5 years running away from his responsibilities, and a retired teacher who had never been able to ignore the suffering of a child. The next morning brought with it the aroma of fresh bread from the local bakeries and the typical bustle of the town waking up for another day. The retired teacher put on her best floral dress and combed her grey hair with extra care. There was something in that child's voice that wouldn't leave her alone, an echo of hopelessness that she recognized from her years as an educator. At 9 o'clock sharp, she knocked on the door of the clapboard house. The sound echoed through the silent interior until shuffling footsteps approached. The aunt opened the door with a puffy face and bloodshot eyes, clearly suffering the effects of the previous night's binge. "Good morning," said the teacher with her gentlest smile. "I've come to pay a courtesy call. It's been so long since we've talked properly." The aunt hesitated, running her hand through her disheveled hair. "Oh, it's not a good time. The house is a mess." "Nonsense, dear. We've been neighbors for so long." The teacher took a step forward, forcing the woman to step back. "And I would really like to meet your niece. I hear she's an adorable little girl." The aunt's face hardened for a moment before she forced a weak smile. "The girl is sick. High fever. Best not to get close." At that moment, a soft noise came from the kitchen, the sound of something being dragged on the floor. The teacher pricked up her ears, immediately recognizing the sound of a child trying to move silently. "Maybe I can help," insisted the educator. "I have experience with sick children. Raised 3 myself, you know how it is." "No need, no," the aunt responded quickly, blocking the entrance with her body. "I already took her to the doctor. It's just the flu. It'll pass soon." The teacher noticed the woman's nervous hands, the way she avoided eye contact, and especially the strong smell of alcohol emanating from her, even though it was so early. All the signs she had learned to recognize during decades of dealing with troubled families. Across the street, the millionaire watched the scene from his window while having breakfast. He had woken up earlier than usual, disturbed by confused dreams, where a child's voice mingled with memories of his former employee. When he saw the teacher at the door of the clapboard house, a strange curiosity invaded him. The teacher finally said goodbye to the aunt, but not before casting an investigative look into the interior of the house. There was something deeply wrong there, and her experience told her that a child was suffering. As she walked back to her house, she decided that she needed to find a way to verify her suspicions. She knew the counselor at the city's social services center well, a former student of hers who had dedicated herself to protecting vulnerable children. Inside the clapboard house, the aunt locked the door tightly and headed to the kitchen, where she found the girl crouched behind the table, trying to hide. The child had tried to reach a glass of water from the sink, but her height didn't allow it, and she had knocked over a chair in the process. "Didn't I tell you to stay in your room?" the aunt growled, her irritation intensified by her hangover and the unexpected visit. "I was thirsty," the girl mumbled, her big eyes fixed on the floor. "Thirsty?" The aunt laughed bitterly. "You want water? Then go get it in the backyard. And since you like to make so much noise, you can stay out there until I decide you can come in." The girl went out to the small backyard, a space surrounded by high walls and dominated by a single apple tree. There, she sat on the ground and began to draw with a piece of charcoal she had found near the gas stove. It was always birds, small, large, some flying, others perched on imaginary branches. Each stroke represented her dream of freedom, of flying away from that house where pain was her only constant companion. The hours passed slowly. The aunt had locked the back door, leaving the girl in the yard under the strong midday sun. The child began to feel dizzy, but she knew that knocking on the door would only result in more punishment. So she began to hum her mother's lullaby quietly, the melody being her only source of comfort. It was this melody that reached the millionaire's ears again. This time he couldn't ignore it. There was something too familiar in that voice, in that specific song. He picked up his cell phone and, almost without thinking, started recording. He didn't know exactly why, but an instinct told him that he might need that evidence. As he recorded, fragments of memories began to fit together in his mind. His former employee used to hum that same song while she worked. The woman who had been an exemplary employee until she disappeared abruptly. The woman who always spoke fondly about her little daughter, a girl named Livian, the millionaire murmured, the cell phone trembling in his hands. His ex-employee's daughter was named Livian. The realization hit him like a punch in the stomach. The child suffering in the house across the street was the daughter of his former employee, the kind woman who had worked for him for 3 years before simply disappearing. How hadn't he made this connection before? The millionaire put away his cell phone and began to pace back and forth in his apartment. He vaguely remembered the employee mentioning family problems, a sister she didn't get along with, financial difficulties. But he was so absorbed in his own problems at the time, the growing conflicts with his wife, the issues at the company, that he hadn't paid proper attention. Now, 5 years later, his ex-employee's daughter was across the street, and from the sounds coming from that house, she wasn't in a good situation. The guilt he carried for the loss of his wife multiplied, now including regret for not having helped when his employee clearly needed it. At 3 o'clock punctually, the screams started again. This time the millionaire didn't step away from the window. He watched with growing horror as through the kitchen window of the clapboard house he saw a female silhouette moving aggressively. He picked up his cell phone again and began to record, this time with more determination. What he saw through the cell phone screen made him nauseous. The aunt was holding something in her hands. It seemed to be a kitchen utensil, and gesturing violently towards a small figure he could barely distinguish. The girl's screams echoed through the afternoon, and this time the millionaire couldn't pretend they were just childish tantrums. When the silence returned, he remained at the window for a few more minutes, his heart pounding in his chest. He had just witnessed something that would change everything. His fortune accumulated through investments in stocks and applications in the financial market had always provided him with a comfortable and isolated life. His assets in dollars, his applications in income funds, and even his reserves in Bitcoin gave him material security. But none of that mattered in the face of what he had just witnessed. The question now was, what would he do with this information? That night, the girl slept on the floor of the backyard, where her aunt had left her as punishment for making too much noise during the afternoon. The child curled up in her own t-shirt and looked at the stars through the branches of the apple tree. In her 4-year-old mind, she made a silent wish to her mother wherever she was, that someone, anyone, would take her out of that place of pain. Across the street, the millionaire couldn't sleep, tormented by the certainty that he needed to act, but paralyzed by the same emotional inertia that had consumed him since his wife's departure. His millions in net worth were worthless if he didn't have the courage to use his power to help a defenseless child. 3 days had passed since the millionaire discovered the child's identity, and guilt consumed him like a slow fire. During those days, he had systematically documented the episodes of violence, always at 3 o'clock, always with the same methodical brutality. His collection of videos and audios grew, but his courage to act remained paralyzed by the same cowardice that had haunted him since the night he lost his wife. On that Thursday morning, the retired teacher made a decision that would change the course of everything. She had spent the night awake, tormented by the certainty that a child was suffering just meters from her house. Her 4 decades as an educator had taught her to recognize the signs, and all of them were present in the clapboard house. She decided to approach the situation differently. Instead of attempting another direct visit to the aunt, she opted for a more subtle strategy. At 7 in the morning, she positioned herself in the side yard of her house, the spot where she had the best view of the backyard of the clapboard house. What she saw horrified her. The girl was sitting under the apple tree, completely alone, wearing only a torn t-shirt and underwear. Her small arms were marked by obvious burns, some still red and inflamed. The child was drawing in the dirt with a piece of charcoal, creating shapes that the teacher recognized as birds. "Good heavens," the educator whispered, her hands trembling as she held onto the fence separating the yards. It was worse than she imagined. Much worse. The girl looked up and saw the lady watching her. For a moment, the two stared at each other in silence. Then, to the teacher's surprise, the child smiled, a weak but genuine smile, and waved shyly. "Hi, Grandma," said the girl in her tiny voice, using the affectionate term she gave to all older ladies. "Hi, sweetie," replied the teacher, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Are you all right?" The girl glanced quickly at the windows of the house before answering. "I'm fine. I'm just drawing birdies." "That's nice. Do you like birds?" "I like them a lot. They can fly wherever they want," replied the child, her big eyes shining with a sadness that broke the teacher's heart. At that moment, the aunt's harsh voice echoed from inside the house. "Livian, where are you, girl?" The terror that instantly took over the child's face said everything the teacher needed to know. The girl got up quickly, wiped her hands on her t-shirt, and ran into the house, but not before looking once more at the educator with an expression that screamed for help. The teacher remained in the yard for a few more minutes, processing what she had seen. The burns, the fear, the way the child reacted to the aunt's voice. Everything confirmed her worst fears. She could no longer pretend she didn't know what was happening. Meanwhile, across the street, the millionaire had witnessed the entire interaction. Through his window, he could see the yard partially, and the sight of the marks on the girl's arms made him sick. For the first time in 5 years, he felt genuine fury burning in his chest. His former employee had trusted him in some way. Even if indirectly, even if he didn't know it at the time, she had left her daughter in the care of a family that lived in the same town where he lived. And now this child was being tortured while he watched from his comfortable window, paralyzed by his own cowardice. At 11 in the morning, the teacher made a courageous decision. She put on her best Sunday dress, took a tray of homemade cookies she had prepared as a pretext, and headed to the clapboard house again. This time, she wouldn't take no for an answer. The aunt answered the door reluctantly, clearly annoyed by the neighbor's insistence. "Mrs. Davison, I already told you it's not a good time." "Dear, I brought some cookies I made yesterday," the teacher interrupted firmly, "and I insist on getting to know little Livian better. As long-time neighbors, it's our duty to support each other." Before the aunt could protest, the teacher had already entered the house, using all the authority that decades of classroom experience had given her. The interior of the clapboard house was dark and smelled of mildew mixed with alcohol. Old and poorly maintained furniture occupied the living room, and there was a heavy atmosphere that made the air seem difficult to breathe. "Livian is sleeping," the aunt lied, blocking the path to the back of the house. "That's a shame." "Maybe another time then," said the teacher, but her experienced eyes had already catalogued several disturbing details. Dark stains on the kitchen floor that seemed to have been poorly cleaned, a metal spoon left on the gas stove, and above all, small charcoal drawings on the walls that had clearly been made by a child. At that moment, a low sound came from the direction of the kitchen, a muffled sob, almost imperceptible. The teacher and the aunt froze. The silence that followed was tense and revealing. "Must be the neighbor's cat," said the aunt quickly, but her voice trembled slightly. The teacher smiled and nodded, but had decided she had seen enough. "Well, I'll let you rest then. But dear, remember that I'm always next door if you need anything." "Anything at all?" The teacher's tone made it clear that it wasn't just a casual offer of help. It was a subtle but direct warning. After the educator left, the aunt locked the door tightly and headed to the kitchen, where she found the girl huddled behind the gas stove, trying to hide. The child had cried upon hearing the teacher's gentle voice, remembering the kindness she had once known. "You were making noise," accused the aunt, her eyes already flashing with familiar fury. "No, Auntie, I didn't make noise," protested the girl, but her small voice sounded weak even to her. The aunt picked up the metal spoon that was on the gas stove and placed it directly in the flame. The girl recognized the ritual and began to tremble. She knew what was coming next. "You want attention, don't you?" the aunt hissed as the spoon heated up. "You want the neighbors to come here asking questions? You think I can't take care of you?" Across the street, the millionaire had positioned his cell phone on the window and was recording again. This time he managed to capture not only the sounds, but also partial images through the kitchen window. What he saw made him make a decision that would change everything. He could no longer be just a silent observer. His former employee had been a good person, a dedicated employee who always spoke of her daughter with love. This child was his responsibility now, whether he wanted it or not. While the girl suffered another episode of systematic torture, the millionaire made a call he hadn't made in months. He called his personal lawyer and former college buddy. "Bob, I need your help with a delicate situation," he said, watching through the window as the girl's screams echoed through the afternoon. "It's about a child, and I think it may be a matter of life. His fortune, built through profits in financial applications and stock dividends, had always given him power, but now he needed to use that power for something that really mattered. His investments in investment funds and his capital accumulated over the years would mean nothing if he couldn't save an innocent child. That night, after the aunt passed out drunk on the living room sofa, the girl managed to slip silently into the yard. Her new burns stung, but the physical pain was less than the pain in her heart. She sat under the apple tree and looked at the stars, humming her mother's lullaby softly. What she didn't know was that, for the first time in months, someone was truly paying attention to her suffering, and that, in the coming days, her life would change in ways she couldn't even imagine. The teacher had taken detailed notes of everything she had observed and was already planning her next action, while the millionaire had finally found a cause that was worth more than all his net worth accumulated in years of successful business. The lawyer arrived at the millionaire's apartment on Friday morning with a grave expression on his face. The two men had been classmates at college nearly 3 decades ago, and Bob knew well the emotional isolation that his friend had built after the loss of his wife. That's why the urgent phone call the night before had surprised him so much. "I need you to tell me exactly what's going on," said Bob, sitting down in the apartment's spacious living room. "You talked about a child in danger, but I need details." The millionaire poured coffee and stood near the window, the spot that had become his obsession in recent days. The girl who lives in the house across the street is the daughter of a former employee of mine. She is being mistreated by the aunt who cares for her." "Mistreated how?" asked Bob, taking a notepad from his briefcase. "Burns, daily screams, neglect." The millionaire paused, struggling with the words. "I have recordings, Bob, evidence of what's happening." Bob was silent for a moment, processing the information. "That's very serious. If you have evidence of child abuse, you need to contact Child Protective Services immediately." "I know," replied the millionaire, running his hands over his face. "But there's something more. The employee worked for me for 3 years. She left abruptly in 2019, a few months before the accident involving my wife. I never understood why, but now you feel responsible," completed Bob, understanding the emotional complexity of the situation. The millionaire nodded. "If I had paid more attention at the time, maybe I could have helped. Maybe she wouldn't have had to leave her daughter with that woman." At that moment, the familiar sound of screams echoed from the house across the street, even though it was only 9 in the morning. Both men turned to the window, and Bob could see the look of anguish on his friend's face. "This happens every day?" he asked, horrified. "At 3 in the afternoon, religiously, but sometimes at other times too," replied the millionaire, picking up his cell phone. "Want to see the recordings?" Bob watched the videos in growing silence, his face paling with each scene. As a lawyer specializing in family law, he had seen many cases of child abuse, but something about the systematization of that violence disturbed him deeply. "We can't wait any longer. I need you to give me all these recordings today. I'm going to contact Child Protective Services and the district attorney. That child needs to be removed from that house immediately." While the two men planned the intervention, across the street, the girl was living another day of terror. The aunt had woken up with a particularly severe hangover and discovered that there was no more alcohol in the house. Her irritation multiplied when she found new drawings of birds that the girl had made on the kitchen wall during the early hours. "How many times do I have to tell you not to dirty the walls?" the aunt shouted, grabbing the girl's arm hard enough to leave marks. "You're a plague, a curse on this house." The girl tried to explain, to say that she had dreamed of her mother, and that the drawings made her feel less alone, but the words were lost in sobs. At 4 years old, she still didn't fully understand why her aunt hated her so much, why each day brought new pain. Meanwhile, the retired teacher had made a decision that would perfectly complement the millionaire's efforts. Instead of going to the grocery store as planned, she went directly to the city center, where the small office of Child Protective Services was located. "Anne, I need to talk to you about a very serious situation," said the teacher, entering the office without ceremony. The counselor looked up from the papers she was analyzing. "Mrs. Davison, it's good to see you. What brings you here today?" "A child in danger. My neighbor. I'm sure she's being mistreated." Anne straightened up in her chair, her expression immediately becoming serious. During her 5 years as a Child Protective Services counselor, she had learned to recognize when a complaint was serious, and the teacher wasn't the type of person to make frivolous accusations. "Tell me everything," said Anne, picking up a complaint form. While the teacher recounted her observations, on the other side of town, Bob was in a similar meeting in the district attorney's office. The prosecutor listened attentively as Bob presented the evidence collected by the millionaire. "This is compelling evidence," said the prosecutor, examining the videos on Bob's cell phone. "I will order an immediate investigation and request the removal of the child from the family environment." "How long will this take?" asked Bob, worried. "With this evidence? We can act today," replied the prosecutor. "I'm going to contact Child Protective Services now." That's how, by a coincidence that would change the girl's destiny, 2 simultaneous complaints arrived at Child Protective Services on the same morning. Anne was finishing noting the teacher's report when her phone rang. "Child Protective Services, Anne speaking." "Anne, this is Prosecutor Lucas." I need you to make an urgent intervention at a house on Cobblestone Street. We have evidence of serious child abuse." Anne paused, her pen suspended over the paper. "Is it number 127 by any chance? Yellow clapboard house?" "Exactly. How did you know?" "I just received a complaint about the same house," replied Anne, looking at the teacher with surprise. "Two independent sources. This confirms the seriousness of the situation." At 2 in the afternoon, a coordinated operation was being assembled. Anne, accompanied by 2 social workers and a bailiff, was heading to the clapboard house. The teacher had offered to accompany the team, using her experience with traumatized children. The millionaire watched everything from his window, his heart pounding in his chest. Finally, after days of paralysis, he had managed to act. Bob was by his side, both witnessing the moment that would change the girl's life forever. "You did the right thing," said Bob, placing his hand on his friend's shoulder. "I hope it's not too late," replied the millionaire, his eyes fixed on the team approaching the clapboard house. In the house, the aunt had gone out to buy alcohol at the corner bar, leaving the girl locked in the stuffy room. The child continued to sing softly, unaware that her life was about to change radically. When Anne knocked on the door of the clapboard house and received no answer, she used her legal authority to enter the property. What they found inside surpassed even their worst expectations. A dirty and poorly maintained house, a strong smell of alcohol, and obvious signs of neglect in every room. It was the teacher who first heard the faint voice coming from the room at the back. "Someone's here," she said, guiding the team through the hallway. When they opened the door to the room and found the girl curled up in the corner, singing her sad song, everyone present felt a pang in their heart. The child raised her big, scared eyes, not understanding who these people were or what they wanted from her. "Hi, honey," said Anne, crouching down to get on the child's level. "My name is Anne. We've come to help you." The girl looked at Mrs. Davison, recognizing the kind lady who had talked to her in the yard. A glimmer of hope shone in her eyes, but was quickly replaced by fear. "Auntie will be mad," she whispered. "You don't need to worry about that now," said the teacher, extending her hand to the girl. "We're going to get out of here, okay?" The girl's departure from the clapboard house was a moment that would be etched in the memory of everyone present. The child held Mrs. Davison's hand tightly, her steps small and hesitant as she crossed the threshold that had been her prison for so many months. Across the street, the millionaire watched through tears he couldn't contain. Bob, moved by his friend's emotional transformation, placed his hand on his shoulder. "What now?" asked the millionaire, watching the girl being carefully placed in the official car. "Now she's going to a foster home until we can sort out the legal situation," explained Bob. "But if you really want to help, we can explore the possibility of you applying for custody." The millionaire's eyes lit up for the first time in years. His accumulated wealth in investments, his holdings in gold and diversified applications, all his fortune built over decades, would finally have a real purpose. It was no longer about accumulating capital or maximizing profits, but about using his resources to give an innocent child the chance of a dignified life. 6 months later, on a sunny afternoon, the girl ran through the garden of the millionaire's mansion, her laughter echoing through the corridors that had once known only silence. Her scars had become just memories, replaced by genuine smiles and the security of someone who finally knew unconditional love. The millionaire, now legally her adoptive father, watched from his veranda as she played with the other children in the neighborhood. Beside him, the retired teacher, who had become a constant presence in the house as a tutor and maternal figure, smiled with satisfaction. "She's happy," said Mrs. Davison, watching the girl draw birds in the sand of the playground he had built especially for her. "Finally free to fly," replied the millionaire, his words laden with an emotion that took years to learn to express. The aunt had been prosecuted and was serving time for abuse. The justice system had worked, But more importantly than that, a network of protection had formed around an innocent child, transforming a tragedy into a story of redemption and hope. And so, through the courage of a retired teacher and the determination of a millionaire who discovered that his greatest wealth wasn't in his financial investments, but in the ability to love and protect, a 4-year-old girl finally found her place in the world, a place where she could sing her mother's lullabies without fear, draw all the birds she wanted, and above all, be just a happy and protected child. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.